All right, take a listen here to something that Gene Simmons said about the Beatles, and then I'd love to hear your take on his comment.
By far the Beatles. There's just nobody that has that depth. And scientists call it a singularity. They came from nowhere. Without qualification, resume, or experience, these four guys wrote hundreds of songs, each one of them instantly recognizable. So there's just no explaining it.
All right, what he's saying there is that the Beatles represent a moment when something came from nothing, when the whole world changed, and it happened to be in the form of pop music or rock music, and they were such an event in the history of music that their catalog alone is enough to give you the full story on what the rock era was all about. So basically, if there was only one band that you could listen to for the rest of the time and you chose the Beatles, you'd be getting the deepest, richest catalog available. More so than that, what he's saying with this singularity comment is that the Beatles are a one-of-a-kind phenomenon. That no matter how popular another band becomes or another artist or performer in terms of sales or views or interest in the popular mind, the Beatles represent a kind of sea change in the whole world, in culture, in the way that everybody looks at one another and at music in general. That's where I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think that Simmons has gone too far in saying this? Do you think that the Beatles, as popular and as talented and as famous as they were a brilliant band, but they don't stand alone? It's not as though there's not another band or artist that competes with them, that even came after them maybe, that has as much of an impact on the world. Now, my opinion here is that the Beatles are a unique phenomenon in terms of when they broke through. And for Gene Simmons and people of his generation, they represent an unrepeatable event. But the same is true for people today who see phenomena in entertainment that maybe we as classic rock listeners don't relate to. So a young person listening to Taylor Swift is having the same experience of, a huge world fame and identity that the Beatles represented, as well as a change in the way of culture. But to someone of my age, they can't really relate to it. And that was part of what the Beatles had going on in their heyday. So on that account, I think I differ with Gene Simmons a little bit in terms of whether or not there are still artists around that are as powerful and as potent as the Beatles in terms of their impact on their fans. Now, whether or not the Beatles represent a unique singularity altogether, in terms of there will never be another artist or act that equals their influence and their artistry combined, I'm not sure whether or not that's true, but I don't think that I want to start naming bands off in this particular video, because I'm really interested in here is your take. Which bands do you think compete with the Beatles for this kind of singularity identity, or which bands do you see operating out there today, maybe still making music today, that may be similar? Or do you think Gene Simmons is right in terms of the Beatles being a one-off, never to be repeated again event that was so profoundly influential that other bands are basically just living in their wake? Let me know in the comments.
Music Guru here, asking you to help us on our march to 10,000 subscribers.